Okay, let's unpack this. When you think of rabies, you probably picture a growling dog or maybe a frothing fox, right?
Yeah, the classic images.
But what if I told you that two, well, often quite majestic and gentle animal families, camels and deer, present some of the most complex and, frankly, dangerous challenges in managing this ancient disease?
It's definitely not what first comes to mind for most people.
So today, we're going to explore what makes rabies in these creatures the Camelidae, so camels, llamas, alpacas, and the Cervidae, deer, elk, moose.
What makes it so distinct and why it creates such critical public health dilemmas.
Exactly. And our mission here really is to pull out the key nuggets from the research, compare their experiences, contrast them a bit.
Because the sources we've looked at, this comparative analysis, it really gives us a unique view, doesn't it?
It does, and it's crucial right from the start to get this idea across. Both camelids and cervids are what we call incidental or dead-end hosts.
Dead-end hosts, meaning they get infected, usually from another rabid animal like a fox or a raccoon, but they don't typically pass it on effectively enough to keep the virus circulating within their own species. They're not the natural reservoir.
Gotcha. So they're like a final stop for the virus in that instance.
Precisely. Not a breeding ground for it, so to speak.
Okay, that dead-end idea is important. Now, for our listeners already familiar with rabies, let's just quickly touch on the basics again. It's that acute, progressive, viral encephalomyelitis.
Right, inflammation of the brain and spinal cord.
Caused by the rabies virus, RABV.
Yeah.
And it's almost always fatal once those clinical signs show up. Affects all mammals, including us.
Absolutely. And transmission, it's almost exclusively via saliva that's loaded with the virus, usually, through a bite.
Right.
It's worth stressing that casual contact, just touching an animal, being near it, that's not considered a risk. The virus is pretty fragile outside the body.
Okay.
So after a bite, the virus kind of hangs out and replicates locally for a bit. Then it gets into the peripheral nerve.
It starts its journey.
Yeah, and it's relentless. It travels up the nerves using something called retrograde axonal transport heading straight for the brain. About 12 to 24 millimeters a day, just steadily moving.
Wow.
And once it hits the brain, it replicates like crazy, causing that severe encephalitis. Then it spreads back out centrifugally to places like the salivary glands.
Which is how the animal becomes infectious itself.
Exactly. That's the stage where it can pass the virus on.
And here's where it gets really interesting. It's this precise journey that makes the incubation period so incredibly varied, isn't it?
Totally. We're talking weeks, sometimes months, occasionally even years, though that's rare. It really depends on things like where the bite was.
A bite on the face or neck means a shorter trip to the brain.
Much shorter. So you'd expect symptoms to show up quicker. Other factors like how much virus was in the saliva, the specific strain, they probably play a role too.
But the key takeaway is still, once you see those clinical signs, it's almost always fatal.
It's a grim reality. The initial signs can be vague, maybe fever, some tingling at the bite site, but within days, it progresses to severe neurological problems and then death.
Okay, so let's turn to the camelids now. Starting with the old world camels, the dromedaries, the Bactrians. Rabies is, well, it's recognized, though not super common, in parts of Africa, the Middle East, Asia. Where are they typically getting it from?
Well, the data points primarily to rabid domestic dogs and wild canids, especially foxes.
Okay.
We looked at a 2007 survey from Saudi Arabia, for example. It found dogs were the source in about 70% of camel cases and foxes in maybe 17%.
And how did they get bitten?
Often on the limbs, apparently while they're defending their calves from attackers, which, makes sense. Protective instinct kicks in.
Yeah.
And there was a notable outbreak in China back in 2015. 15 Bactrian camels died, and tracking the virus showed it was a dog-associated lineage.
Right, so shifting continents now, New World camelids, llamas, alpacas. Here in North America, cases are, extremely rare.
Exceedingly rare, yeah. I mean, the first documented U.S. case was a llama in Oklahoma in '89. And the source was traced back to a skunk rabies variant.
Okay.
More recently, 2014, there was an alpaca case in South Carolina, and that one was linked to the raccoon variant.
So it really highlights that for llamas and alpacas here, it's spillover from local wildlife, right? Raccoons, skunks, whatever the main rabies reservoir is in that specific area.
Exactly. It's that interface between domestic animals, often in pastures, and the surrounding wildlife carrying the virus.
So what does rabies look like in a camelid? The sources suggest the paralytic form, the dumb form, is more common, especially in dromedaries. like 67% in that Saudi study.
It's right. It often starts subtly, maybe restlessness, not eating. Then you see excessive salivation, sometimes odd head and neck movements like rotation, then ataxia, that wobbliness, and progressive paralysis.
Often the hind limbs first.
Yeah, often starting in the hind limbs, leading to recumbency. The animal just can't get up. And death usually follows within, say, 3 to 5 days. It's a quieter progression than the furious form, but just as fatal.
But the serious form does happen in camels, though less common, and it sounds incredibly dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. When it occurs, you see extreme aggression. Hyperesthesia, where they're abnormally sensitive to touch or sound, often painfully so.
Ouch.
And they might bite anything, other animals, people, even inanimate objects. Male camels, particularly during this phase, can be extremely aggressive.
I read about that Iran case. Camels attacked by rabid wolves.
Yeah, that was a chilling account. Those camels became incredibly aggressive, reportedly biting the faces and lips of other camels. It really shows the profound neurological effects.
And in llamas and alpacas, similar signs.
Pretty similar spectrum, yes. Neurological issues, sometimes aggression, sometimes paralysis. The presentation can vary, but the underlying severe brain dysfunction is the constant.
Okay, so we've got the transmission, the clinical signs, but you mentioned something earlier about a unique public health risk with camelids, particularly llamas and alpacas. What makes them uniquely concerning?
Right, this is a really important point. It comes down to their spitting behavior.
Of course. Defensive spitting.
Exactly. And since the rabies virus is concentrated in the saliva, well, a rabid llama or alpaca spitting could potentially transmit the virus.
So not through a bite, but through spit landing on mucous membranes, like eyes or mouth, or maybe an open cut.
Precisely. It creates a non-bite exposure risk. The spitting can aerosolize that virus-laden saliva, potentially contaminating someone from a distance.
Wow. That significantly raises the stakes for vets, handlers, anyone interacting with them closely, petting zoos, farms.
Absolutely. It's a unique transmission route we don't typically worry about with, say, rabid cattle or horses. It really underscores why knowing species-specific behavior is critical in assessing zoonotic risk. Yeah.
Definitely a different dimension there. Okay, let's move into the woods now.
Yeah.
And talk cervids deer, elk, moose. Here, rabies seems mostly like a wildlife interface issue.
That's the main picture, yes. Infections are almost always spillover from those established or enzootic cycles in wild carnivores.
Raccoons, skunks, foxes again?
Those are the main players, depending on the region. Cases in wild deer are considered rare, but there's a suspicion they might be underreported.
Because a sick deer in the woods isn't always found or tested.
Exactly. Geographically in North America, most deer cases have been linked to the raccoon rabies variant, which is well established in the eastern U.S.
Or not always raccoon.
No. Interestingly, that first confirmed moose case in Alaska just last year, in 2023, that animal was infected with the Arctic fox variant. And it happened during a known outbreak in the local fox population.
So it really depends on the local reservoir.
It absolutely reflects what's circulating in the wildlife in that specific place.
And it's not just wild deer. Captive deer farms have seen outbreaks, too.
Yes, that's a documented concern. Pennsylvania had a significant situation between 2007 and 2010-11. Rabid deer across 4 different farms, all traced back to the raccoon variant.
Why is that particularly worrying in a farm setting?
Well, a couple of reasons. First, the high density of animals on a farm might make deer-to-deer transmission more possible than it would be in the wild where they're more solitary.
Right.
And second, the movement of farmed deer between states. That carries a risk of accidentally moving a rabies variant into a new area where it wasn't present before.
Translocating the virus. Okay, clinically, what does rabies look like in deer? You mentioned it's consistently the furious form.
Yeah, predominantly furious. You see really profound neurological problems, disorientation, a striking lack of fear of humans is common. They might allow people to get very close.
Which is obviously dangerous.
Hugely dangerous. Also, aimless wandering, circling, stumbling, that general lack of coordination or ataxia. Aggression can occur too, and excessive salivation, drooling, that's pretty common across species.
And there's a particularly distinctive sign sometimes seen in white-tailed deer, something about head trauma.
Yes, this is quite dramatic. Severe self-inflicted head trauma. They seem to compulsively press their heads against things or rub them frantically.
Leading to physical damage.
Oh, yeah, badly. Extensive hair loss, swelling, scrapes, even deep ulcers, especially around the forehead and eyes. In really bad cases, the reports mention exposed bone, even exposed brain tissue. It's a pretty specific and disturbing sign. And that Alaskan moose case showed similar signs: stumbling, imbalance, lots of drooling, and that uncharacteristic aggression towards people. Plus, it had bare patches of skin, possibly from similar rubbing.
Okay, this brings us to a really critical challenge with cervids, the overlap with chronic wasting disease, CWD. Why is this overlap so important?
It's critically important and a huge diagnostic headache. CWD is, as you know, a fatal prine disease in deer and elk.
Like mad cow, but in deer.
Sort of, yeah. Same class of disease. And the problem is, its clinical signs: weight loss, listlessness, that vacant stare, maybe repetitive walking, excessive salivation, can look exactly like rabies in the field.
You just can't tell by looking.
You absolutely cannot tell just by looking. And this is crucial because CWD, as far as we know, doesn't transmit to humans. But rabies does, and it's fatal.
So the stakes are incredibly high.
Incredibly high. Any deer, elk, or moose showing neurological signs must be handled with extreme caution, full protective gear, and treated as a potential rabies case until proven otherwise by lab tests. Presuming it's just CWD is too dangerous, public safety has to come first.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, moving to the public health imperative side diagnosis. For both camels and deer, definitive diagnosis is always postmortem, right? After death, using brain tissue.
Always postmortem. Testing a live animal antemortem testing is just not reliable for rabies diagnosis in animals. The gold standard test is the direct fluorescent antibody test, the FAT test done on fresh brain tissue.
And beyond just confirming yes or no for rabies?
Molecular tests like RT-PCR and genetic sequencing are vital. They don't just confirm the virus is there, they let us identify the specific variant.
Ah, so you can tell if it came from a raccoon or a skunk or a fox or even a bat.
Exactly. And that's crucial for epidemiology, understanding where the infection originated, how it's moving, and how to target control efforts like wildlife vaccination campaigns.
Speaking of prevention, vaccines. This seems like a major hurdle for these animals. No specific USDA-licensed rabies vaccines for camelids or cervids.
That's the big challenge, yes. Vets have to use what are called extra-label vaccines, ones licensed for other species, like cattle or horses.
So what's the big deal with extra label use if the vet vaccinates the animal?
But here's the medico-legal gap. Even if that llama or deer is likely protected immunologically by the extra-label vaccine, public health authorities might not legally recognize that vaccination status if the animal gets exposed to rabies.
Wait, so even if my llama was vaccinated, if it gets exposed, they might still recommend euthanasia.
They might have to, yes. Or recommend a very long, very costly 6-month quarantine. Because without a licensed vaccine, there isn't the official data proving efficacy that regulators need to confidently shorten that observation period.
Wow. That puts owners and vets in a really tough spot.
It absolutely does. It highlights a real need for research to get vaccines specifically licensed for these species. It's a gap in our system.
So besides vaccination challenges, what else? Fencing? Feed storage?
Yeah, basic biosecurity helps. Good fencing to minimize contact with wildlife, storing feed securely so it doesn't attract raccoons or skunks. And for the wildlife reservoirs, those oral rabies vaccination programs, ORV.
Dropping vaccine baits from planes.
Sometimes, yeah, or distributing by hand in targeted areas. They've been pretty successful in controlling rabies in raccoon and fox populations in many places.
And if an animal is exposed, what are the guidelines?
The National Association of State Public Health Veterinarians, the NASPHV, has recommendations. For an unvaccinated camelid or captive cervid exposed to rabies, the first choice is euthanasia, unfortunately.
Because of the risk and the long incubation.
Exactly. If the owner refuses euthanasia, then it's a strict 6-month quarantine. Very intensive.
And if the animal was vaccinated, even extra low-valley.
Then the recommendation is an immediate booster dose of vaccine to really ramp up the immunity, plus a 45-day observation period. Much shorter, much more manageable.
Okay, now the bottom line. Human exposure and protection. Who's most at risk here?
Vets, obviously. Farmers, animal control officers, and hunters are a key group, especially when field dressing deer handling the head or spinal cord without precautions is a potential risk if the animal happened to be rabid.
And if someone is exposed, post-exposure prophylaxis, PPP, it works well, right?
Extremely well, nearly 100% effective if given promptly and correctly. For someone not previously vaccinated, it involves a few key steps.
First step.
Immediate, thorough wound washing. Soap and water for at least 15 minutes, really crucial first step.
Okay.
Then, human rabies immune globulin, HRAG. It's basically preformed antibodies given around the wound site to provide instant passive protection.
And the vaccine series.
And 4 doses of the rabies vaccine given in the arm muscle on days 0, 3, 7, and 14 after exposure.
And if you were previously vaccinated, like a vet.
Much simpler. Just good wound care and 2 booster doses of the vaccine on day 0 and day 3. No HRIG needed because their body already knows how to make antibodies quickly.
So the tools are there, but recognition is key. Which brings us back to those look-alike diseases. Why is recognizing that clinical overlap so incredibly dangerous if missed?
Because failure to consider rabies, failure to test for rabies, can lead to people being unknowingly exposed. You might think, oh, it's probably just listeria or maybe CWD, and handle the animal or its tissues without proper precautions. If it was rabies, that's how tragedies happen, preventable deaths.
So let's quickly run through some key mimics. Listeriosis, you called it circling disease.
Yeah, it's bacterial, often from bad silage, causes neurological signs like circling, head tilt, facial paralysis. But the key difference, it can often be treated with antibiotics. Rabies can't.
Okay. Another one was PEM, polyencephalomalacia.
Right, PEM, that's metabolic, usually a thiamine, vitamin B1 issue, or sometimes sulfur toxicity. You might see blindness, stargazing posture, ataxia. But crucially, it often responds well, sometimes dramatically, to giving thiamine. That response itself can be diagnostic.
And CWD, we've covered that extensive overlap in deer. Anything else?
Well, other things could cause neurological signs, maybe equine herpes virus 1, certain arboviruses like EE, meningeal worm, especially in llamas and alpacas, even fescue toxicosis or ryegrass staggers in camelids grazing on certain grasses.
Lots of possibilities.
Which is why the most critical public health principle, the absolute paramount rule is, any camelid or cervid that dies or is put down after showing acute neurological signs must be tested for rabies.
No exceptions based on suspicion of something else.
No exceptions. A presumptive diagnosis of listeria or PEM or CWD is just not good enough. Skipping that rabies test creates an unacceptable risk for everyone involved. Vets, owners, hunters, lab staff. You have to rule out rabies definitively.
This has been, well, a really fascinating and, yeah, sometimes sobering deep dive. We've seen how rabies in these unexpected hosts, camels and deer, while rare, acts as this crucial sentinel.
An indicator of what's happening in the local wildlife reservoirs.
Yeah, and we've unpacked the different ways it presents that dumb form often in camels, the furious form, and that really striking head trauma in deer. And the huge diagnostic challenge from diseases like CWD or listeria. These aren't just odd cases. They tell us something important. So what does this all mean for us? Maybe the deepest dive here is thinking about how our interactions with animals, wild and domestic, are constantly changing. Agriculture, building into wildlife habitats, recreation. It all reshapes the landscape for these zoonotic diseases, right?
It absolutely does. The human-animal interface is constantly evolving.
Which just makes vigilance, careful observation, and that commitment to testing more critical than ever. It leaves you wondering, what responsibilities do we have as a society to bridge these gaps, the vaccine gaps, the diagnostic awareness to protect both animals and people from these dead-end but still dangerous infections?
That's the crucial question to keep asking.